It was very curious that when I began to write 1492, I said to myself, I couldn't write this book when I was in Holland because I had to be completely free, completely for myself, just dedicated to literature, and to dedicate like 10 hours a day for investigation, writing. And since I was a child, I had admiration for historical character, Christopher Columbus. Then I said, one day probably I am going to write a book taking place in the 15th century. But when I began to write about 1492, I discovered that the discoverer that Christopher Columbus was a difficult historical character because the years before the 1492 are very dark, only speculation, and the years after the discovery are well documented and too well known. And for me it was very difficult to say, to go around this character in a frontal way. And reading about the period, I began to read a lot about the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. Then there was something that I didn't read very often around Christopher Columbus. And when I went to Spain in 1984, to visit the places that my book, the episodes of my book were taking place, Toledo, Seville, Madrid, Zaragoza, Calatayud, Trujillo. I went to Avila, and in Avila, I visited the convent of Santo Tomás, where I knew Fray Tomás de Torquemada was buried, and the tomb was in a chapel there. Then I asked the guardian about the tomb of Fray Tomás de Torquemada, and he said that he knew nothing about the tomb, that he didn't know what I was talking about. Then later came a priest, and I said, where is the tomb of Fray Tomás de Torquemada? And he said, oh, long time ago there was a fire, and Torquemada disappeared. And I said, but how is it possible to disappear? He was underground, and the fire was on the floor, etc. Then he said, no, he disappeared, and he left. Then I told myself that like Torquemada, the Spanish Inquisition was disappearing of the history of Spain, that the Spanish people didn't want to talk very much about it. And when they talk, they justify the Inquisition, the expulsion of the Jews. And also reading about it, I was reading about Isabella Católica, the Queen, and I read a biography written in the 40s, and was an official publication of this period. And the biographer, who was a German biographer, said the Spanish people were our precursors in the persecution of the Jews, and they were already thinking of a final solution, but at the time was not possible. But they established the Inquisition in a very instructive way that for us has been very useful to know about it. And sometimes reading about what happened in Germany in the 40s and what happened in the late 15th century in Spain, sometimes it's the same policy of persecution, the same registration, the same self-denunciation of the Jews. Then I began to investigate more about the Spanish Inquisition as much as I could, and because the inquisitors were writing everything that the victim said. For example, in the sessions of torture, always there was somebody taking note, and if the victim said "I" twice, the man wrote, the victim said "I" twice, and what the victim ate, how was dressed, where it was living, the neighbors, and also the witnesses were reporting information about daily life. And for me, the Inquisition was very useful, all the trials, because they gave to me first-hand information, or information about daily life in Spain in the second decade before the end of the 15th century. Then I began to know the price of bread, the price of clothes, the salaries, the places of the meeting places, the hotels, the roads, who was the neighbor of what person, everything. And I discovered also that every period, as every man, has its own language. And in order you go through to a historical period, you have to learn this language, you have to know about this language. And my character had to speak the language of the times. And the best way to do it is through literature. Also, besides I was reading historical documents, I had to read a lot of literature of the period to know how the man of this time was expressing himself, what was his concept of love, of time, of popular life, politics. Then the first thing I had to do is just that the language of the novel, of the character, was faithful to the period, but was not archaic, because also I tried to avoid that I was not making a historical grammar of my book. And I had to balance the fiction and the novel and the historical frame, because when you are writing a historical novel, always there is a dilemma that, at least for myself, I have to document myself as if I was writing a book of history, a historical book, but at the same time a novel. Then the characters of the novel have to be like characters of the period, but based like in biographies of the people of the time. But at the same time, you have to recreate language, and you have always to be to balance these demands of you have. Sometimes it happened to me that I was writing fiction, and suddenly I need, like, the character had to go from one place to the next, to the next. But I realized that I have to build a bridge, a historical bridge. I had to know the name of the bridge, the name of the streets he was walking, in order he was walking in a natural way, like in a contemporary street. Then I had to wait until I built this bridge. And sometimes also the documents, the historical information was taking the book away also, was becoming too much historical. Then I had to stop And as Joseph Conrad said, there were times when I was writing 8 hours, 10 hours, and I had to stop because was I tired. Then I felt this desperation of the untold story, that something you have in your head, but had to wait to be explained, to be written, and that is for me who came from poetry, because poetry for me was lighting, poems I lighting as an act of love, and with the novel I had to learn to be patient, to wait, to read documents sentence after sentence, in order I can get this feeling of the 15th century Spain. But also there was another thing. I was written a book with characters who were Sephardites, and I was not a Sephardite myself. But something strange happened. There were many times when I was dreaming with Sephardites in a synagogue in Spain, and I see who is these people coming and talking to me, and I was so involved in the life of these people, discovering the customs, the religious customs, that they were inside me, and I said, well, I am in the right track, because these people is becoming a dream, and if I am dreaming of these people, it's because they are becoming inside myself, in my own imagination, in my own past. And then when we were in Spain, we had to go to this Jewish life in different cities, but I had like a blockade of visiting the places, because this pass was not, the people tried to erase this past, to blockade this past. And I found still in many Spanish intellectuals just a feeling of anti-Semitism, of almost of the period, sometimes in the daily expressions, came in the same language that the Inquisition was using. And when I finished the book, we proposed this book to the Spanish publisher, who was my publisher in Mexico also, and they reject the book. They said the novel is very good, but that's not the idea we have to commemorate the 5th centenary of discovery of America, taking out that Jews from the closet. We have another way. It's a feast of the Hispanidad. Then I said, well, I don't care. I published the book in Mexico, etc. But when the book was published, I had two reactions of Spanish people. One very ordinary person said to me, I didn't know that we were so bad with the Jews living in Spain, he said. And another person was from Seville, and she came from a noble family, and she said, your book made me feel nostalgia of Spain, of the old Spain. Then it was completely different opinion, and what I tried to bring together for this reason was that to understand the year 1492, because sometimes I understood that this year was very crucial for us, not only because the discovery of a new continent, but for me, 1492 really, beyond the historical discussion, the controversy, As 1492 brings many facts to the end and to the beginning. For example, as the end of the Muslim dominion in Europe, in Spain, a long war of the, then also probably more than 1,000 years of a Jewish life in Spain comes to an end also. Also is the beginning of the publication of the first grammar of the Spanish language. Then the rules of our language are written by Elio Antonio de Nebrija. And also for the Christian Church, this year is when the Pope Alexander VI, Alejandro Borgia, is elected Pope. Then it's just almost the beginning of the schisma in the church, in the Christian Church. But many times it's said that 1452-53 is with the fall of Constantinople is the end of the Middle Ages. For me, really, 1492 is the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the modern times, because it's when we have a knowledge of a global knowledge of our planet, and many things come together. Many things are discovered and it's exchanged. And also is when really I believe that medieval man who was living in European cities, in walled cities, and also in a walled world, broke these chains and new horizons in America. You can see that in the architecture. You can see in Avila, for example, the walls around the city, and you can see in cities like Morelia in Mexico, the new architecture that is huge and is open, is a little, is more ambitious. They have a space, and also you can see that an ecological exchange took place, that not only Christopher Columbus brought destruction to the New World, but also he brought to Europe many things that were discovered gradually, like potatoes, tobacco, chocolate, tomatoes, corn, and a new flora, new fauna. And in his second trip, he took to America, when at the time was not called America, but to the Indies. He brought wheat, barley, the cattle, dogs, cats, pigs, horses. Then this natural exchange took place and was very important for Europe and for the new continent, because many of these flora and fauna became almost native of the other countries. And also a biological exchange took place. The Spanish brought illnesses, typhus, measles, smallpox, and they brought to Europe syphilis, that for the time was the AIDS. It's like AIDS of our times. The Europeans have no defense for this venereal disease and propagate very fast in Barcelona, in Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, Germany, many countries. Then, as some people say, the Spaniards took to the New World the biological allies that kill a lot of Indians because they have no defense against these illnesses. And also the Europeans have no defense, no? then that has been very important to know that, because sometimes Christopher Columbus, yes, is a controversy around him, but sometimes they blame him for everything bad that happened in the New World always, no? And we have to understand also that in the New World, at the times there were conquests, interconquest, like in Europe. People dominate other people, conquer other people, and like in Europe. Then there were not completely in peace with themselves, no? Like sometimes they blame Christopher Columbus, saying that he is responsible of the Contras in Nicaragua, of AIDS, of the foreign debt, of dictators, everything bad that happened in Latin America especially is bad, is because Columbus, and also of the black slavery. Then, well, probably the responsible man for black slavery in America was Bartolomé de las Casas. And like that you can see the transformation of the conquerors in America with Bartolomé de las Casas, because he came of the Dominican order, and the Dominicans were the inquisitors in Spain. They were the Dominicanis, the dogs of Lord. And in America, they became like liberators, several Dominicans, like Pedro de Córdoba, Fray Antonio de Montesinos, and Bartolomé de las Casas, who was probably the first defensor of human rights in the world, or at least he was the first defensor of the Indians in the New World. He came to Mexico as Bishop of Chiapas in 1545 with the new laws, with abolition of slavery and freedom for the Indians. He was at the time the most hated man in the New World by the Spaniards, who had Indians as slaves, because every place he went, he was insulted. There were attempts to kill him, but he made the liberation of the Indians the work of his life, and until the moment he was dying in Spain, he was recommending to his disciples don't to forget that to defend the Indians. And also he had a concept that is very modern for us of the conquerors. They said Pizarro, Cortés, Montejo, De Soto, Dávila, Nuño de Guzmán, all these people said, I hope that they disappear of the memory of the life of the living people, because they are a shame. But he had a sense of these conquerors are people who honor humanity, but also probably he saw already the mentality of the people coming to the New World, that came just very greedy, just to steal, and no respect for the new lands, etc. Then he had very clear concept. And like that, there were many people coming, and also to Mexico, for example, we had the first university in America, and we had Bernardino de Sahagún, who had the College of Tlatelolco, and many of these people teach the Indians to make art of medicine, and humanities. Even Miguel de Cervantes wanted to go to Mexico. Then there is so many things. There were 4 categories of people trying to go to the New World. The first category were the discoverers, the second were the conquerors, the third were the missionaries or evangelizadores, and the fourth were the pobladores, the settlers. And these categories make the Indies, because for us it's very important to know what kind of people came to the New World, in order we can understand the conquests that follow, and also what kind of a Spain was at the time, because sometimes when the conquerors came to Mexico, they were shocked to see human sacrifices in Mexico. But if we see the Spanish from Mexico at the period, they were making also human sacrifices, because they were burning people alive in the autos de fe, but just in the name of another religion. Then we have to see this in the perspective of time, or 5 centuries later, that, for example, just if we take 1492 or 1491 or 1492, we see that at the same time in Mexico City, in Mexico Tenochtitlan, there were human sacrifices, the priest taking out the heart of the victims to be offered to the sun. But at the same time in Spain, they were burning people alive to another god, to the name of another god. Then is when you ask yourself, where is civilization? What culture is superior, or is just the same? We are just in the human history, on one side of the world, on another side. It's one of the things coming. It's a reflection of these matters, no? I don't know.
I understand that Homero Aridjis wanted to make a stop now, and it is it is still 10 to 9. We can have an interval of a quarter of an hour, and then have a talk about his way of writing. Oh, you propose to do it now?
Yes, but
you agree? And then poetry first? Oh, we should do it orderly. Maybe I should ask Mrs. Wertheim what we best can do. No?
Yes.
Oh. All right.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have made a small selection of poetry by Homero Aridjis, a few poems of which Dutch translations are existing, and another series of poems of which English translations are available at the moment. But first, his principles in poetry. That's a poem called Una Poema. Have you enough light?
Yes. Then I read one paragraph and you the translation?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we are reading in Spanish and with the translation immediately. Yes. 9. Yes. Yes.
But I don't know.
Yes.
I can check.
Yes.
Which
Yes, that is the end. Yes. Then we read. Okay.
De Dutch translation, de Nederlandse vertaling, is van een iets andere versie dan de Spaanse, blijkt nu. Maar we zullen proberen om u toch de indruk te geven in de vertaling.
Un poema. Un poema es una suma de hombres y una combinación de palabras.
Een gedicht is een som van mensen en een verbinding van woorden.
Con las palabras asumimos la historia, con el poema hacimos la vida.
Met de woorden verwerven wij de historie, met het gedicht pakken wij het leven vast.
El poema hecho, como el momento vivido, entra en una forma inalterable, en una condición irreversible.
Het gedicht dat klaar is, zoals het moment dat geleefd is, neemt een onveranderlijke vorm aan, een onomkeerbare toestand.
En la condición irreversible de los momentos humanos.
De onomkeerbare toestand van menselijke momenten.
En la condición evasiva de las cosas del mundo.
De ontwijkende toestand van de dingen van de wereld.
Todo poema fluye, huye.
Elk gedicht vloeit, vlucht.
En un mundo de sucesión, las palabras se suceden para captar el mundo.
In een wereld van opeenvolging volgen de woorden elkaar op om de wereld te vangen.
El poema sucede en un espacio verbal en el que el ser abstracto se materializa un momento.
Dat is een regel die niet in de Nederlandse versie voorkomt.
It's not okay. Next. El poema es la manifestación concisa del ser, es la historización organizada de sus tensiones.
Tampoco.
El poema es la euforia del ser.
Het gedicht is de euforie van het zijn. Maar...
El poema absoluto es la suma de todas las palabras.
Het absolute gedicht is het woord van alle, is het moment van alle woorden.
Sí. Hecho el poema, el poeta desaparece.
Als het gedicht eenmaal gemaakt is, verdwijnt de dichter.
Pensar para llegar a lo impensado.
Denken om het ongedachte te bereiken.
¿Qué otro crees?
Y pues.
Dan moeten we ook meer heel erg het hele gedicht lezen.
Ja.
Y luego tú en inglés todo, ok. Ciudad de México. Esta ciudad humeante llevó un vestido nuevo cada mañana por un sol sagrado que le daba sus hilos. Los ahuehuetes, como templos verdes, y los templos de piedra apuntaban al cielo, y las calles, los canales, los puentes se marchaban azules a los campos abiertos o subían a los cerros. After the second, ¿no?
This smoking city wore new clothes each morning in threads made by a sacred sun. Our wettes like green temples, and the temples of stone pointing to the sky. And the streets, the canals, the bridges went off, blew to the open fields, or climbed the hills.
Sin moverse un segundo, las calles caminaron a la noche, se volvieron nombres perdidos en las que vivieron fantasmas. Paseo de la Reforma, que Avenida de los Insurgentes, fueron curadas por el fuego, la destitución y el desastre. Sus tejados se arrodillaron sobre el polvo y sus cristales se mezclaron al ladrillo, al cemento y a la ceniza. Calles, ríos sin movimiento, corrieron deprisa hacia el crepúsculo que esperaba al hombre en cada bocacalle.
Without moving for a second, the street passed into night, turned into the lost names where ghosts lived. The Paseo de la Reforma and the Avenida de los Insurgentes were cured by fire, destitution and disaster. Their roofs knelt in the dust, glass crushed with brick, cement and ashes. Streets, unmoving rivers, ran hurriedly toward dusk that waited for man at every crossing.
Now another one. Which one?
Yes.
del hombre.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got it. Perfectly, yeah.
Okay, that's okay. Profecía del hombre. Las nubes colgaron como ollejos, los ríos se estancaron muertos, se extinguieron las aves y los peces, en las montañas se secaron los árboles, la última ballena se hundió en las aguas como una catedral, elefante sucumbió en el zoológico de una ciudad sin aire, el sol pareció una yema arrojada en el lodo. Los hombres se enmascararon, sin noche y sin día, caminaron solitarios por el jardín negro.
Dit gedicht is in de vertaling van Barbara van der Pol. Het heet Voorspelling over de mens. De wolken hingen als droge schillen. De stromen vielen gestorven stil. Uit stierven de vogels en de vissen. In de bergen verdorden de bomen, de laatste walvis verzonk. Als een kathedraal in de zeeën en de olifant bezweek in de dierentuin van een verstikte stad. De zon leek een dooier in het slijk geworpen. De mensen deden een masker voor, ze isoleerden zich in plastic zakken. Zonder nacht en zonder dag gingen ze eenzaam door de Zwarte Hof. Dit is een gedicht van vroeger, wat eigenlijk al helemaal aansluit bij de huidige activiteiten van Homero om de natuur, om weer vrede te sluiten met de natuur. Zoals
I am reading just in Spanish because there is not a translation. A poem about the Mexican art, or like called Vientos de Piedra. Vientos de piedra. Cuando el viento huía por los llanos, el hombre vino y lo hizo piedra. Cuando el sol caía por sus rayos, el hombre vino y lo hizo piedra. Cuando la serpiente corría por el tiempo, el hombre vino y la hizo piedra. Capturó a la muerte con los ojos, apresó a lo invisible con las manos, fijó la impermanencia en una forma y en todas esas formas metió dioses. Pero el viento metido en una piedra se hundió en el polvo y en la hierba. El sol del mediodía bajó a la noche y la serpiente emprendió el vuelo. La muerte salió de su escultura, se fue a los caminos y a los pueblos y desde entonces anda con cabeza humana. El hombre, fantasma de sí mismo, fue demolido por sus propios dioses. De todo aquello hubo lo que quedó al principio, unas piedras.
Ja. Het is het goede moment voor de pauze op dit moment. Ladies and gentlemen, interval. Maybe in a quarter of an hour we meet again here. Spain and the New World, and maybe you can tell what you intended to do with these well-known themes, but they are treated, I think, in a very different way than other books on the same subject.
Well, one thing I realized that there is not final truth about the subject, that every person, every interpretation is different, and we have to accept many versions, a lot of controversy. But one very important thing is coming out of the commemoration of the 5th centenary of the discovery of America, or the meeting of two worlds, that there is a big movement in America of the Indians that they are protesting for 500 years of injustice. And I guess that is very positive because exactly the commemoration of the 5th centenary of the meeting of the two worlds is bringing attention to this problem, because the Indians have been the victims, historical victims, always, and especially now with the environment, for example, we notice that every time that there are economic development, new projects, they go against the Indians, and they expel the Indians of from their lands, out of their lands, and always without compensation. And besides committing ecocide, they commit ethnocide. And these two things come together. And we had a conference in Mexico in September about the end of the millennium, or an analysis of the state of the planet before facing the end of the millennium, the Christian millennium. And there were Indians from Peru and the United States, and they were very strong in their opposition to the commemoration of the 5th centenary, because they said, for us it's not a commemoration, it's just really to be sad about this date. And if anyway we can go back to history, we can erase history, and we have to accept what happened. But we have to realize that it's very important that the Indians come to the front, discussing what happened to them.
Your writing is not really engaged writing, I think. You are not an engaged author in the classical sense, but still you aim to something to make clear how history works, how emotion works, and how do you feel yourself, your relationship to the engagement, since you must be free as a maker of images in poetry?
Well, I believe that a writer or a poet have to write a good book or a good poem first. Also, if my own trajectory, I noticed that when I was a young writer, poet, most of the writers and poets were Marxists at the time. We felt a lot of pressure in the university, in the literary circles, to take positions to the left. And on another side, because in a country like Mexico, sometimes people went to the right or also wanted to be priests, then I was not tempted, I must to say it, to be Marxist or to be a priest. I thought always that an intellectual has to be independent, has to be free, and to take moral positions, but as an individual. But in my later years, I have this compromise with the environment, because I think now that with the collapse of communism, and that the fall of the Berlin Wall, the world has changed, but we are arriving to a new humanism, in my opinion, that is the defense of the environment. That for me, for example, at the moment, besides writing, that is my profession, there is nothing more important as an individual, as a human being, than to defend life in this planet, because I feel that we are losing the flora and the fauna. We are losing the air, we are losing the water, we are losing the human life in the cities, And me coming from a place like Mexico City, where every day you have to go out. When you go out, you fight for your life because you awake in very polluted day, and the city is full of cars, and you see everywhere the problems of overpopulation, human overpopulation, cars overpopulation, industrial overpopulation, and in a limited planet, we have this unlimited growth. Then you see that the forests are disappearing, the animals are disappearing, the rivers are polluted, lakes are polluted. Then we want very simple things that sometimes are becoming the most difficult things to get. That is, we don't want great monuments, big buildings with big projects. What we want is a clean air and a clean water. But that's becoming the most difficult things to get, at least in our countries. And I feel that we as human beings, as citizens, we have to defend life on the planet, just because we are living very critical years. And it's just, at least, as I say, like in Mexico, you see how the forests are disappearing, but very fast, that you are in a place today and you come back 2 months later, then the forest is gone. And when you saw an animal moving 2 years ago, you come back to the same place and these animals are gone. Then you feel desperation. You say, well, I don't want to be living in a silent and dead planet. I want to inherit this planet as we knew it, full of life and the plurality of life. Then I think that we were, in this century, we knew a lot of movements of human liberation, interhuman liberation, like saying the liberation of the black people, now the Indian people. But I guess we have to arrive to the day when we have to live the movements of interliving liberation, or to say that all living beings, all living creatures, we are equal. And we have to fight for and arrive one day to this condition. And for in this moment, I believe that this is my compromise, and I feel a little engagé with these problems that is nature.
Well, this gives already an answer to some extent to a question that I have here before me. Is writing a novel a better medium to tell the truth than a historic document? You also could interpret, is writing a novel a medium to tell the truth? And I think that's something you are interested in.
Yes, I guess we as writers, as human beings, as ecologists, we have to be honest and trying to say the truth in any possible way.
Is there a real chance well, you should try what you can, but that artists and intellectuals really can have an influence on this way of life in this current in history? You hope so, of course, because otherwise you wouldn't have. But at the you are doing something very new now in these years to approach the problems of ecology from a poetic and intellectual point of view only, and to make it in images. But do you expect that this can be another approach worldwide? What are your expectations?
Well, I guess that this approach is coming. I feel that it's becoming universal, or universal in the way that the whole world is coming to this understanding about what is happening with life in this planet, and that is what I feel that, for example, in Mexico or Latin America, we have the tradition that intellectuals participate in public life, they have this compromise, this duty sometimes. Even people ask you, they are not satisfied that you write books. They are asking you to take position about public affairs. They are asking your help. Then sometimes you can avoid this compromise. And what happened to me as a writer with this group of 100, for example, is typical of this situation. In March 1st, 1985, we were worried, tired, desperate because the pollution problem in Mexico City, and we wanted to do something. Then I thought that we as writers, we had to be together, writing a declaration, a manifesto about what was happening with the ecological deterioration of the Valley of Mexico. Then I began to call other people, other writers, colleagues, to say, do you want to sign, do you want to write with me this? And all of them agreed. Then finally, I was preparing this document myself, and when we published this declaration about pollution in Mexico City, I thought that was only one day act, and I forget it, no? But suddenly I didn't know that I opened a door, and a door came out a river called ecology, and took me away this river, and I can't stop anymore. Everybody was calling me, the media was calling me, the politicians, the people asking for help, etc. Then I couldn't go away anymore, and every day is becoming worse and worse. I am called Saturdays, Sundays, because people say in a neighborhood they are destroying this park, they are cutting these trees, we had an explosion in a pesticides factory, this river is polluted. Then I am receiving all the complaints against the crimes against nature everywhere. And I am a citizen, I am a human being. Sometimes there was an occasion this year that was 6 o'clock Saturday morning, and somebody was at the telephone, and we were afraid because the father of my wife is 88 years old, and we thought, my wife and me, that something was happening to him. There was somebody in Córdoba, Veracruz, calling full of panic, saying there was an explosion in the factory of pesticides. There are hundreds of people, school children sick, and we were in a state of emergency. There was a censorship about the news, not news at all about the accident. You have to help us to call attention, to help us to make an evaluation of the damages. Then my Saturday, I was prepared to write, to read, was changed because this emergency. Then I felt myself like in a general hospital, coming this unexpected news all the time. And before coming here to Holland, also with the sea turtles, we are we have the compromise to defend the sea turtles in Mexico. I was very active in the protection of the sea turtles. Suddenly there was an arrival of the thousands of sea turtles. They told me they are arriving to the Pacific coast. You have to come to see these turtles coming out from the ocean and to see if they are not killed. Then I have to fly to this place because it was very important, and like that goes life, no? But this is strange sometimes how
but still
moral compromise takes you over.
But this has a lot to do with your literary work, although it is not so concrete, of course. I think there is a unity in your poetry and your prose and also in these activities.
Yes, well, it's coming into my poetry, for example. Now, for example, writing about Mexico City, I have to include the ecological side. My vision of pollution is permanent.
Yeah.
Then
If you-
everything I say is that.
Yeah. If you would have to place yourself in a certain literary tradition, how would you define yourself? Since, well, it is a very obvious, many people know that you admire poets and you are friends with poets and writers like the late Henri Michaud, André-Pierre de Manillac in France, Edmond Jabès, the late Jabès, all writers of imagery, of fantastic worlds, and you are so well documented and clear, and when you got your first poetry prize, to say this is a Latin clarity instead of the Baroque Latino-American way of writing poetry, but your affinities always have been with the more fantastic side in literature and the images. But how do you define, well, the very concrete way in using literature and making a view of the world?
Well, must to say that always I had an admiration for a poet that is not writing in Spanish, is not alive, is not of this century, but sometimes for me was the model of what a poet must to be, and was Dante Alighieri. It was because the Commedia has been was one of my favorite books, and what I like in Dante that he make this historical, mythological, moral summa like, and also what I like in him, he had a moral position before history and before his contemporaries, and he had this moral position as a principle and was integrated into his work. I say for me it's completely different than a poet because I am not living in this religious also division of the world like hell, purgatory, paradise, and just very systematic accommodation of history and all things happen. But his moral position before the politicians also, etc., for me is a model of a poet.
And have you any contemporary examples where you feel the same spirit, the same tendency?
Well, in some cases, yes, but some cases I agreed and disagreed. For example, with Pablo Neruda, sometimes I agreed, but sometimes I disagreed, because some moments when he was Stalinist, I was against this position. But when he took also was against dictators in his country and continental conscience of America, history, nature, then I like it also very much. Then it's some things like that.
Yes. Well, in your recent interview published in the Dutch weekly HP de Tijd, you told Jan Donkers that Mexico is in many ways much more similar now to the United States than to Spain, what a thing that the Spaniards don't realize. Do you think this applies also to the approach of literature? Or is this a way of modern Mexican literature to be closer to the world in American fiction?
Well, has been this situation of Mexico that because the proximity to the United States, the influence of the United States, also we are in negotiations to sign the free trade agreement that is the first economic treaty between countries of North America, Canada, United States and Mexico for the first time. They are coming together beyond the separation of language and history. Then what I feel, and I try to be sincere and to be honest with my relation also with Spain, I have a lot of admiration of Spanish literature. The classics, the Spanish classics are my classics. I learned how to write in Spanish because the classic Spanish literature. Even writing my last novel, I was reading Don Quixote, and how to you write well, or Fray Luis de Leon. For me, they are always masters of the good writing in Spanish. Is beyond time. Anyway, I feel that Spain has become more integrated into Europe. It's more European, and their political, economic interests are in Europe. And to Latin America, there is the language that unites us, but also it's more, the relationship is more rhetorical now than material, than concrete. And with the United States, the relation is becoming more concrete, is more immediate. And if there is a possible economical relation, it will be United States-Mexico, but not Spain-Mexico. Well, we can have business, we can can have trade, but the complete relationship will be more in America. And that is the relationship. And also with 1492, I feel that Spain is more oriented to Europe for 1992 next year than to Latin America. And that is the reason that the Latino Americans can be integrated to the commemoration of the 5th centenary. They feel completely separate, disinterested, they don't care, and they see more an economic colonial exploitation of Latin America than a real celebration.
Yes. A question, well, if there is not an avalanche of telephone calls to you, but when are you writing? Is there do you write disciplined, or just as the inspiration comes?
Well, I have to keep a few hours for myself. I try every day, if it's not an emergency, but if it's a normal day, I awake, I have breakfast, and immediately I begin to write. I keep in the morning 1-2 hours every day, and sometimes in the evening. When do
you write by hand, or do you write with typewriter?
I write by hand, also with electric typewriter, but I write many times the same page, because when I write by hand, is the first version. Later, when I typewrite, is the second, and I force myself to rewrite it many times, but the whole text. And my wife has a computer, and says to me, why you don't use it? But I prefer to rewrite everything in the whole, because every time I rewrite, I have the corrections and another version of the things. I become more integrated to the text.
You use also the graphic way of writing to improve your text. Yeah.
Exactly, yes.
Yes. What are you writing now? Is it poetry, is it prose, or is it both?
Well, it's prose, it's a novel taking place in Mexico City.
Is Juan Cabezon again a character in it?
No, because I became exhausted after the historical novels.
But
I need a break of a few 10 years at least, because I was exhausted. The documentation was so huge that, for example, when I went to Berlin for the second book, Memories from the New World, I brought with me like 10,000 photocopies from books, booklets, and articles, documents I didn't find in Mexico. And every time I was traveling, because I had no time to read the documents in place, I had to make photocopies and later organize these photocopies or periods, chapters, and according to the needs of the novel, and I read it. Then the investigation was just tiring, and I had not the energy now to write another historical novel. And also I conceived the books as a historical diptych. The first book, New World, Old World, and the second, New World.
Yeah, but Juan Cabezon could be reborn in our times
Yes.
and be a character again.
Yes. Yes.
So many things have happened to him.
Yes, but I believe in the need of the characters, the need of the novels, and I didn't want to prolong the life. It's just when you arrive to a certain moment, you say, it's enough, because said what you wanted, and to prolong the life beyond this novel is like, it's a little forced or intentional.
Is there maybe any question that has not been written down but that can be posed now? Yeah, there is a question. There are two. First at the back.
I have two questions. One of technical character and the other perhaps more substance. In your introduction, you mentioned, one thing that is clear now, that Mexico has the first or the third university in all the American continent. And the second question is, which is your judgment or your analysis? How would you see your work if you would need to contrast it with the work of Pablo Neruda and with the work of Cesar Vallejo? How do you judge those two important American poets and the influence that they might have had?
Yes. Well, was according to the information, was the first university. First, yes. I don't remember exactly, but I guess was 1547, around that, the dates. It's more or less talking of memory. And Cesar Vallejo and Neruda, for me, it's just two poets that I like. Poems of both of them. For example, I like very much the poems of Poemas Humanos and some of Los Heraldos Negros, his first book, and also Trilce, and also Neruda, Residencia en la Tierra, some parts of the Canto General, but less. I like the Machu Picchu, but also even the love poems, I like it, and the Odas Elementales. Then I guess they are sometimes different, sometimes they come close together, but they were sensibilities that completely different. And I like both poetries.
You had another question.
Yes, I have a personal question. Did you grow up bilingual? Did you speak Greek as a child too?
No, I didn't speak Greek as a child because my father never taught me Greek. He came from a place near Smyrna, and he was fighting the Turks in 1922, and the Greeks were defeated, and because they had no relationship with the other part of Greece, when he left Greece, he never came back, and never thought to come back. That was, in a way, I don't know if good for him, but for us was all right, because we were very integrated in Mexico. We had not this nostalgia to come back. I like very much the Greek mythology, the Greek classics. I read it, but the relation with the Greeks were not so close, because I had not teaching, and my father just said, I'd never come back because now it's Turkey.
There is another question.
Well, there is a speculation about it. It's not possible to say he was a Jew or he was not a Jew. I guess it's so arbitrary to affirm or to deny. I guess, for example, in his behavior, sometimes his psychological, he was a little behavior was he was like a converso, because he was too demonstrative in his practice of Catholicism. He was always making religious invocations all the time, for San Fernando, Santa Maria. Always he was invoking that, and that was a behavior of many conversos that all the time had to demonstrate that they were real Christians, that really they converted into Christianity and they were not judíos ocultos, hidden Jews. And there is the only historical things, documents that exist around that is that in Zaragoza there was a man, Abraham Colom, more or less could be the father of Christopher Columbus, and also in Galicia, that is another discussion about if he was Gallego or not, is because in Pontevedra there was a woman with the same name of his mother that was a conversa, and that is just more or less the two historical sources more known.
Do you think there is a way to characterize Latin American literature after the bomb? There is a direction, there is unity? After the boom?
After the boom. Well, for us, is the boom before or after is artificial. Is to say there were writers, important writers before the boom, and for example, even Rubén Darío, we have many important poets and writers, Borges, Neruda, many people, and after the boom there are many writers also. I guess the boom was more a commercial.
It was also the boom was a moment when the Western of the European languages discovered Latin American literature, and in a few years all the classics of the century were published combined, and people thought they were all written in the same period. And you had also, of course, the great names like Borges, Cortázar, the beginning of Garcia Marquez,
Neruda.
and this Neruda. So this made out the boom, and I think the productivity of Latin America letters is as prosperous as ever. Yes.
Well,
But there is no way to characterize something going on now.
well, must to say that for me, coming after, there is not, there are a few books, good books, written by novelists of the boom, but for me it's not just literature, Latin American literature stops there or comes from there. It's just a few writers, a few books, but for me I have also other preferences, and after this movement there are more writers, no?
There was also a great variety between the different writers of the boom, so it was not a unity at all.
There was a little forced because, for example, in Mexico, they had before in the 40s the muralists, the painters, three muralists, the three grandes, the three biggest, and that was very exclusive of other painters because there were other good painters that were not included in this trio. And as we know now, Frida Kahlo, for example, was not included, Tamayo was not included, and other painters who were very good at the time were not included in this trio. Then it was a little artificial, and with the boom, they tried to simplify the literary work in 5 or 6 names, and the rest were out. But there were very important writers out, like Borges, for example, or Neruda.
Another, yes, there.
I have a personal question. You spoke a lot about your sensitivity towards nature, to the biological world, and yet you also spoke about your engagement in the struggle to preserve life. Are you like often tempted to leave the city, to leave the metropolis?
Many times, many times, and must to say that sometimes I am in the city, downtown, in the middle of traffic, surrounded by smoke, coughing, my eyes crying, and headaches, and I say, why I am so crazy to be living here, why I don't live immediately the city, because I am dying with the city, I am sick, and then I go home and ecology comes again, and you see also children that are suffering this smoke, this pollution, and you say, well, I have to do something for these other people also. It's very simple for me to leave the city, but the problem stays, and I can be a foreigner abroad all my life, and I like Mexico City. I think has a marvelous weather. I like life in the city, the cultural plurality. It has a lot of energy, and has many beautiful places. And I don't want to lose the city to say, and it's also for us it's very important historically, because some are centuries of history of art, architecture, and for Mexicans, Mexico City is the heart and the brain of the country. It's almost a superstition of this city, and for this reason, when one of the first drawings came to Europe about Mexico Tenochtitlan, and Albrecht Dürer saw this sketch of the city, he thought that was the ideal city, because was a perfectly planned, geometrical doors to the different directions of space, and was an artistic city. Then for us it's very important to save the city, and because we live in a centralized country, if we leave the city, we are losing also the country, because pollution, ecological deteriorations go everywhere.
Homero Aridjis proposes to read a last poem here, not a last poem, but maybe there is an urgent, ultimate question to pose to him. That's the one. Yes.
I wanted to ask you if you have a lot of political problems because of this point of view in Mexico. I mean, I think that the ecological movement has a lot of problems with the official government because they have a lot of responsibility because of all the contamination that is caused. Maybe it's a difficult question to answer.
Well, no, yes, it's, behind every ecological problem, sometimes we find economic or political problems. Then there is impossible to touch this, to solve the ecological problems without solving the political or economic situation. And because the issues become political always, automatically, then when we make denunciations, we never know what is going to happen tomorrow. That is one of the big problems, and also, for example, defending the Lacandon forest or the sea turtles. We are touching interests of many people, and always is a little risky, and sometimes I have to be careful, don't to go to some places. Or for example, last week visiting the Oaxaca coast to see the arrival of the turtles. Until the moment I didn't leave the place, I didn't feel safe. You don't know, can happen anything any moment. Then I have to be alert all the time in these places, no? And always all the issues become political, yes. And sometimes the government reacts friendly, and sometimes unfriendly. Sometimes they call us, or sometimes they attack us. And we never know how or when, or that is the situation. And The government consider us political. Sometimes I was in a political list, like the opposition, without to be in the political parties or the opposition parties, but I was in a political list.
The poem that Homero wants to read is called Dream in Tenochtitlan, and Tenochtitlan is the name of the metropole, the capital of the Aztec Empire, and on its place Mexico City has been built. But this is a poem that is particularly dear to him.
Es Sueño en Tenochtitlán. Toda la noche entre las casas blancas atravesé el canal. Los remos cortaban en el agua el verde silencioso de los sauces y revolvían las sombras de los templos. Del otro lado del canal, en una barca amarilla venías tú, con la cara pintada de rojo, y por un momento nuestras barcas se cruzaron bajo el puente azul, y ya no pude seguir. Tus ojos que me miraron clavaron en mi corazón flechas de luz. 2. Tus ojos dejaron en el aire pájaros azules, y tu cuerpo dejó a su paso cuerpos luminosos. Alrededor de ti todo se calmó. Las gentes que pasaron por las calles entraron una en otra sin salir de sí mismas. Yo atravesé tu cabeza transparente, yo levanté tus manos impalpables, yo bebí luz de tu pecho, yo, un gallo negro nos despertó.
At the end, I read the translation that has been made by Elliot Weinberger, a very famous translator in America, who also has translated other Latin American poets and prose writers. And this translation of the poems by Homero has also got a literary translation prize. All night, I crossed the canal between white houses. The light is not so clear, so I have to. You see it better than I do. Cars in the water cut, the hushed green of the willows, and the shadows of the temples swirled from the other side of the canal. You came in a yellow boat, your face painted red, and for a moment our boats met beneath the blue bridge. And then I couldn't follow, your eyes watching me, rays of light fixed in my heart. In the air, your eyes left bluebirds, and your body left luminous bodies in its wake. Around you, everything became calm. People passing in the street entered each other without leaving themselves. I traveled through your transparent head. I raised your weightless hands. I drank light from your breast. I, a black rooster, woke us.
Thank you.